What's going on, Washington Commanders Nation? Today, I would like to welcome to the show a guy whose expertise in analysis on this NFL draft class is someone you want to pay attention to. My guy, former co-host with me at Sidelines Washington. He's the host of the Burgundy and Gold Report and Happy Hour, Mr. Adam Aniba. How are we doing today, boss?
Good, man. It's a wild day. Hearing these coordinators speak, yeah, like you were saying, it definitely got me excited.
Definitely got me excited on both sides of the ball. Cliff Kingsbury and Witt have totally different deliveries, but like Joe Witt brings a swagger and a bravado this defense needed. And before we get into the linemen and the linebacker prospects in this draft class that we're going to talk about today, how do you feel about how Washington has attacked this new offseason?
I like it. I think the first question, of course, when they struck out on Johnson was, okay, is Quinn their third, fourth choice? Right now, to me, it doesn't matter. I think that what they're doing is they're just assembling a staff of, former head coaches, guys that are viewed in the business as some of the best brains. That's what I want to see. And ultimately, what I want to see, will they work with the players? Will they get the best out of them? Talking about Forbes today, that's what I wanted to hear, because anybody who watches football can tell you that Forbes is not a bust. This guy just needs some real coaching. Unfortunately, most times the NFL, they don't get that, but the really good to great teams, like you're seeing San Francisco, Detroit, Kansas City, they're able to coach them up and really teach them. So I think that's what's got me excited. I'm not, no delusions of grandeur here that this is a Super Bowl, great staff. But what I'm seeing is it's a staff of, so far, what we're being told is guys that are going to, bring a lot of different aspects to the table and, mold it into one. We'll talk about Kingsbury, but it was some interesting stuff about their systems and, things we could expect.
Absolutely. And I see guys that can teach, guys with experience, a big wealth of knowledge. We have 17 Super Bowl rings combined within our new coaching staff.
Oh.
It's a new day here in DC. And like you said, with guys like Forbes, they just need the right tutelage and the right fine tuning. It's very interesting to know that Dallas was very high on Emmanuel Forbes going into the class. They actually expected him. They expected him to fall to them and was surprised by Washington taking him. And it was nice to hear Joe Witt Jr. call Forbes and Quan Martin by name when he was going through his press conference today. But I'm going to get to the press conferences for both guys at another time. We're here today to talk about two of Washington's weakness on this roster. I know everybody wants to talk about the splash positions and our biggest need, which is at the quarterback position. But when you look at the 2024 draft class, is Washington going to be able to finally get its linebacker room right? And are we going to be able to build an offensive line that's formidable enough to protect our investment that we'll draft in the first round?
Well, I'll tell you this, just like in many years, but this is another, down year, I guess, for, immediate impact linebackers, especially middle linebacker. If you're looking for, outside guys, A&M's Edgerrin Cooper, there's some guys like that that can really create pressure. But Washington, although they do need that, I feel that Mike linebacker they've been missing since London Fletcher, that's a little bit, bit of a question mark. You and me, Peyton Wilson, NC State, one of my favorite guys. Again, comes with questions, injury concerns. You have Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Cedric Gray, all guys that could probably fit that Mike role, but we're not talking about a ton of depth. So if they're going to address that position, I think, that second with those second round picks, maybe the third, they got to get it going. But it's something that I think that they should solve in free agency and really build on that position more in the draft, because you've got guys like White from Tampa Bay, Queen from Baltimore. Not really sure if he can man that mic, but he'd be somebody I think. If we sign him, I think they probably have a plan for him. You see what Quinn, you see what the defensive coordinators did in Dallas. They're able to mold to guys and put them in their best position. So to me, it's not just linebacker, it's the Mike linebacker. I think, you have Jamin Davis over there. You really don't have much else. I think those are spots, the weak side linebacker. There's a lot of those in this draft. I think you can build upon that, but the Mike linebacker, that is still going to be a concern. If they don't address this in free agency, coming to the draft, even though there are some guys there, I am going to be concerned because it's not an easy position to fill.
Okay, so I'm going to shelve the linebacker conversation for the time being, and we're going to jump straight to the offensive side of the ball. We had a serious problem with protecting our quarterback, whether that was on the coordinator, the quarterback's inexperience, or the offensive line. I believe you can divvy up the blame pile. a bunch of different ways here in Washington. What was Washington's biggest issue protecting Sam Howell in 2023?
Oof. Yeah, it's a tough one. You could definitely look at the coaching, see how the offensive line, and that's why people are questioning the guy coming from the Giants. But he's done a lot more than just working for the Giants. So I think we've improved in that area. But
Mhm.
man, the tackle positions, it's just in bad shape. I think you saw what Lucas did at the end of the year. He would have been a better option to have it, at left tackle other than Leno. I think wouldn't have done too much. But honestly, out of the whole group, Cosme is really the I don't know about shining star, if you want to call him that, but the guy who probably had the best production out of the group. So you're talking about they theoretically they need to replace 4 out of the 5 new starters because that O
Wow.
line as a whole was a problem. You have Wiley; he's not going to be easy to release with his dead cap hit, but he did play guard in Kansas City, so he'll be an option to play on the other guard opposite Cosme. But yeah, I think luckily for Washington, this draft is deep with tackle, and I think left tackle and right tackle, at least 2 or 3 guys. In the first 6 picks, I think they're going to have to figure that out.
So Charles Leno starting at left tackle. He's going to be a cap casualty going into this.
I think so. I think so. I think there's some dead money there, but there's definitely some savings. It's minimal, but I think it's just time to move. Great guy. Awesome guy off the field. With his philanthropy and what he does. But you're not saying he was the biggest problem, but if you're really trying to build a winner, you can't just have an okay to average left tackle blindside. You got to have somebody with some juice, and he's just not the one. So I think he's definitely going to be a cap casualty along with Logan Thomas early on.
Yep, I think so about both guys. I totally and wholeheartedly agree. But yeah, you definitely need a stalwart protecting the blind side of your quarterback. And most likely that's always going to be found through the draft and
Right.
not necessarily through free agency. Stalwart left tackles aren't usually available in the open market. So you got to find that and usually earlier in the NFL draft, which moves us to our prospects going into 2024. So when you think about Washington, we're picking second overall in this
Right.
class. That is most likely going to be a quarterback. What say you to fans who think Washington cannot fix its O-line if we spend our second overall pick on a quarterback?
See, I've been a fan since '83. So I used to, if you asked me 5, 6 years ago, I probably would have said, yeah, just build that offensive line. But at this point, I'm a realist, and you have a new team, new regime. They're not going to start that off with a tackle at number 2, and even trading back, although it could be a good situation to continue to build that line. I think you got to have that name. You got to get that guy. And, with the first 3 picks, I think it's all going to be quarterback. So really, I think Caleb Williams, he's going to the Bears. If they're talking about a Godfather offers, only thing they can consider. So that would be like double the RG3 trade
Yep.
that we had. So you're talking about Drake May and Jaden Daniels. Either one of those going to go to Washington. Me, I've watched both film, on them, and just from hearing what Kingsbury said, so I'm a little more torn than I was about the whole air raid if he's not really running it. But I think that either one of those guys, it's going to come down to the interview process, the combine.
Mhm.
One of those guys is going to be a commander.
Yep, I think one of them is definitely going to be a commander. And I think we have a lot of draft capital, 5 in the top 100, 6 in the top 107. We
Yep.
have more than enough capital to get the offensive line built along the way. Like we have 9 picks in this draft. This idea that the line was going to just fix overnight if we take one in the first round, I don't know where fans get that illusion from, but starting in the second round, we not only have 2 picks in the second and 2 in the third, we have enough capital that if we wanted to move into the ass end of the first round, we could
Right.
slide up as well. Are you prioritizing the outside of the offensive line or the interior first?
I think the interior, that's something you can definitely find more on later day 2, day 3. I think with the tackle, you're going to see a run with those. Just my prediction. I think wide receiver and tackle is what you're going to see a run that second part of the first round. So I do think Washington will consider moving up towards the back end of that first round. But if they stay put, there's going to be guys in that early second round. More than likely, right tackles, though, I think the left tackles, some of the key name guys will probably off the board coming off the first. A guy that's been rising through the draft process is Patrick Paul from Houston. People thought maybe, his brother is actually a guard for Washington right now, the one out of Tulsa. But
Good
I
call.
think
Yep.
with a guy like him, he's rising, and there's even talks of him going to early second, first now. So he's a guy that you could see them, really target in that range. But I think we're talking about when they drafted Dwayne Haskins and then moved up in the back end of the first and got
Sweat.
Sweat.
Hmm.
I think this is a perfect situation. I think they can move in that back end in that first round. There's a bunch of guys. Jordan Morgan, Arizona. I mentioned Patrick Paul. Then you start to get to the right tackle area. J.C. Latham, Alabama. Tri Futanana out of Oregon. There's different guys that are going to be available. But I think that if you really want to get a guy that you with hopes to start him early on, you're gonna have to, maybe move in the back end of the first round, or use that first pick in the second round on him. But I don't think you can wait too long. But yeah, you got to start with the tackle position. Though I think they're gonna look at it in free agency, even if they do, I still think you got to look at that position. Come early on second round.
Absolutely. That is a position you have to fill in the draft. So let's say Washington does the idea we just painted. Washington decides we're going to do just what we did when we got Haskins and Sweat that year. We're going to package one of our seconds, probably pick 36,
Right.
next year, second, maybe something additional, and get back into the 20s to get back on the board in night one of the draft. Who would be your number one candidate for Washington to move up to make that move?
It's again if they last, because I evaluated Amarius Mims, right tackle to Georgia. He's really
Mhm.
rising up, and now people are talking about the back end of the first round. That would be a guy I could definitely move up for. We saw him at the Senior Bowl. Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma.
Big boy.
Questions, if he can, played full time at left tackle. He has played on both sides. He had some good and bad during the Senior Bowl. I mentioned Patrick Paul, but the Fashanu and Alt, I think those are the top two, the cream of the crop. I think those guys are going to be off the board in that top 10 to
Very
12
early.
range.
Yeah.
But, and I mentioned Jordan Morgan, another one at Arizona. He's another blindside protector. So there's going to be some guys, that I don't get to. But, during my evaluations, I'm going heavy offensive line, even into, like I said, into day three, looking at, guys from Howard, South Dakota State, because I'm a true believer, that's one position, unlike the skill position players, that you can find at all levels. It's just a matter of, do they fit what you want to do? But I'm pretty confident they're going to adjust that position pretty early on, just not with that first pick.
I seen you mention Jordan Morgan from Arizona. They said he had an up and down week in Mobile at the
Yes.
Senior Bowl. Does he project better as a tackle or a guard to you? Because I heard he has position versatility.
I think that if a team takes him in that, that top 35, 40 range, they're not going to move him inside. It would be to play him outside. But I think that's a fallback plan if it doesn't work out. But because, yeah, he definitely had some up and down reps. But for the most part, from the film that I've seen from him, man, he's just got a lot to like. And, just a, good bend, really good athletic ability, looked good when he was pulling, moving down the field. So that's the kind of guy in the modern day, NFL offenses that you really want to have. But I think early on, you draft him, you play him at left tackle.
Okay, put him right there, left tackle, start him off. And when it comes to the top of the draft, the guys that are going to be unavailable to Washington, I'm seeing the name Talise Fuaga pop up in conversations, and I'm seeing guys say he could supplant Fashanu or Alt in the top 10 of the NFL draft. Is Fuaga as good as the top two guys that we hear about all the time?
Um, I think for the singular reason that Shanu and Alt are both left tackles, and Fuag is going to play right tackle. So no, I don't think that he'll go in front of them. But I think it'll be close where they go. I think he's going to. I started the process again. I've been evaluating for a couple months, so I had him in that second, third round range when I first started. But he's definitely been a guy that's risen up draft boards, and especially after the Senior Bowl. But I don't think he's going to supplant them. Just like the Georgia tackle last year, he went a lot earlier. The kid from Tennessee went a lot earlier than expected.
Mhm.
But again, I think these are premier left tackles, probably in the last couple of years, not just this draft. So I think that, one of the other, Fashanu and Alt, they're going to go, LT1, LT2, but I think he'll follow right behind them, again, competing with, Mims from Georgia. He's another one that I really love. I love his athletic ability.
Okay, so Amarius Mims, how high is he going to shoot up in this draft? Because they're talking about him as if he has the highest ceiling in the entire draft. He has a freakish athletic build,
Yeah.
and he moves crazy. And I trust that Georgia program.
Yeah.
How high are you willing to try to shoot up to get back into the first round to get that guy?
I yeah, I think he's going to be probably off the board by 25, 26 at the absolute latest. But again, this is a guy that when I started the process, I had him in that mid-second round range, but it just goes to show you, sometimes when they're not even playing football, their stock just continue to rise just, with more talk. But you talked about athletic ability, just tremendous overall size, length. The mean streak, that's what I really love about him. That's something that's a reputation of these Georgia, tackles, interior linemen. Van Brunt, did I pronounce his name right? What's it called? Cedric Van
Van
Pran,
Pran,
another one,
yeah, the center.
center out of Georgia. He's a guy I
Mhm.
just started watching, only 2 games into, but that whole line just plays with such a mean streak. I think if you want this guy, you're gonna have to move up into the top 25. So in Washington's situation, I think they can do that with their first, second, like you said, a second next year, and probably cost their third to do that. But I definitely think it would be worth it because I think you got to solidify this offense. You're going to go quarterback with that first pick. You really, free agency, regardless of what they do, they have to continue to build that position up in the draft.
Oh yeah, and we have a chance to double dip in the second round with 2 second rounders and 2 third rounders. Even if we move into the back end of the first,
Yes.
we still have another second round pick to go. It is a good year to need offensive linemen, and
Yep.
Washington is in desperate need of both. When you see this air raid offense that Cliff Kingsbury didn't want to call or
Yeah.
categorize as an air raid, is there a specific type of lineman Washington is looking for to suit that offense?
Again, initially you would think more of the zone guys, the quicker, not as big. But I think that's out the window. I think with the hire with Lynn, with the running backs and coach, and hearing what they want to do, it's not just going to be a title. This is a guy that was a former head coach. I think the plan is they all really want to mesh their concepts together. So I'll take him at his word when he says he doesn't want to call it the air raid. So I think it'll just be about, quick, athletic, long linemen that, just really can get out in space. Because I think when they run the ball, I think you're going to see a lot of screens, a lot of comebacks, a lot of high percentage stuff for their receivers. But either way, I just think you have to have the best guys at their position. You start to get into, day 2, day 3. That's when you can kind of see guys that are more, maybe they're looking for guys that fit their specific system. But right now, it's a crapshoot because I went back, watched some of the Kingsbury Arizona film. He utilized the tight end more than he ever did in his career, with Zach
Mhm.
Ertz. A lot of people told me, because I've been evaluating tight ends lately, a kid out of Kansas State, I just dropped a report on
Been
that,
cynic.
he doesn't really use them, especially a guy like, reminds me just like Chris Cooley, that fullback, tight end, H-back kind of flex position. But if you look what he did with Zach Ertz, before Zach Ertz started having more injuries, he really wanted to use that tight end. So I think, you can look what you saw in the past with, the Mike Leach original air raid scheme, but to me, it sounds like they're really going to mesh it. He specifically mentioned play action. That's a breath of fresh air. We want to hear that as Washington fans. I love timeless. I think that just, really helps your whole team, especially offensive linemen with high percentage plays. So I think that it's just going to be the strongest, most intelligent, guys, that they trust really just going forward there with their young quarterback. But will they, the idea of people thinking they've got to draft offensive linemen with most of their picks, they're not going to start all these rookies. So there's going to have to be some veterans in. There's going to have to be, some development going on.
Mhm.
So I think that they'll have a certain type, but I think that before we get to the draft, even I think they'll have a better idea of what they're looking at, with the type of player. We'll get a better idea because I think with some of the signings, maybe some of the releases, we'll get an idea of maybe what the mold they're looking for an offensive lineman.
For sure. And Adam Peters has his hands full here, but we have to trust the process because we have needs on the offensive line. Does not mean we're just going to go O line, O line, O
Yeah.
line, O line in the draft. It doesn't work that way. There's
No.
a list, there's a draft board, and you have to whittle players down to each spot. And I don't think it's going to work like that entirely. You mentioned Sam Cosmi earlier. He's the only real sign of a building block Washington has on its current O-line structure here. Who are your top targets to start opposite him at the left guard spot if we were to get one early in this draft?
Early in this draft, Jackson Powers, out of Oregon, they've talked about him center, but that's another guy, position
That's a big
flexibility.
boy. That's a
Fans
big
love
center.
to fans love to hear that term, but no, he's definitely
Mhm.
someone like that. We talked about Van Pran from Georgia, but I like a guy, more in that, probably early day three range. Zach Frazier from West Virginia. He's another one, center guard. Guys that I think that can, fit that mold, but
Dare you
don't
say
sleep.
position flex?
You know, don't sleep on returning guys like Paul, who was transitioned from right tackle to. I know he didn't have the best second part of the season, but again, coaching matters. And and I mentioned Wiley. I've talked to a lot of Kansas City fans and said, they don't know what Washington's doing. That any decent play that Wiley really had was when he was a guard, and a lot of his bad play was covered up by the offense when he was at tackle. So I would definitely not be surprised to see him slide into that left guard spot. But yeah, right now every one of those spots is up in the air.
Talk to me about Christian Haynes of UConn, if he's someone that's been on your radar as well. Someone we've heard had a good week out of in Mobile. I believe he went to Bowie High School, Bowie State, or something like that. He's from the area. Talk to me about Christian Haynes.
Yeah, I just started watching him, but what I can see is this guy's going to go earlier than expect. A couple weeks ago, I think you were talking about maybe that third round, late second at best range. This is a guy that I could tell you could see his stock jump all the way back into the top end of round one. He's that good. So I don't think that he'll be somebody that Washington will target. I just think that teams are just going to fall in love with him as the process continues. Yeah, I think you talk about a guy that saw his stock, go dramatically up at the Senior Bowl. It was him, and same with this kid that I evaluated out of Kansas State. He's looked at third, fourth round. I think he's moving into the second round. So a lot of guys made some money during their time in the Senior Bowl.
So when you talk about Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon, which is like the biggest center I've ever seen in my
Yeah.
life, him and Zach Frazier out of West Virginia, when you talk about position versatility between those two, would you rather a guy who's already started at guard, or is that an easy and seamless transition to move from center to guard?
Yeah, definitely not a seamless transition. I think that's when it comes down to the coaches and the football minds, because I think they can sit down with these guys in 5 minutes and just go over concepts with them and see how easy it is. Then once they get them on the field, seeing their technique, if it's that's probably the secondary part. It's really a lot has to do with mental, from what I'm learning. Like I really, until the last like year and a half, offensive line is something I've been a work in progress, but I've had to evaluate a lot so far. So I'm learning a ton about them. And I don't think it's a seamless transition, but for guys that have that high IQ, because that's one thing that's a prerequisite for a really good center, in my opinion, they're able to make that transition. It's not like going outside to tackle, sliding over. It's not a big deal, but I can definitely see, both those guys you mentioned do that if need be. Because a lot of times, to get these guys early on the field, we saw it with our I'm blanking right now on his name, our rookie from Arkansas. They had him
Ricky
at guard.
Stromberg. Ricky
Stromberg,
Stromberg.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you can see that teams will try to get them, into other spots before, they get a chance to play their true spot, which is center. So I could see that with the guys we talked about. So it's really about, what is their plan with them and how early do they go? Because if they're going early, I don't think you try them at any other way than center. But if some of these guys do happen to slip, Powers is not one of them. But like I mentioned, Frazier, if you're able to get him later on, that's a guy that you can have as a backup center and a backup guard. So depth is so underrated, and we've seen how injuries can really just devastate a team, especially on offensive line. So to me, I love evaluating the mid late round guys, because they're so important. As Washington fans, we've seen how imperative it is to have good depth. So it's not just about looking for starters. It's looking for guys that are really good depth pieces, and especially swing tackles. You want to see with certain formations, they're going to have big alignment, big sets. So the bigger the bad boys you can, the better you're off. Yeah, for sure.
And I'm glad you mentioned Ricky Stromberg, because that segues into my next question. I was going to ask you about the holdovers from the 2023 NFL draft. I know Washington didn't get much to any production
Yeah.
out of our 2023 draft class. We drafted Ricky Stromberg. What is his potential like as a starting center here, if that isn't a possible future for the team? And is there anything we can salvage from the Braden Daniels experiment? Because I think he was practically put on IR because there was no role or place for him on the active roster last year. In camp, he looked out of shape. He looked like a
Yeah.
turnstile, and he looked like he needed to work on his play stream significantly. Are those guys factoring into Washington's draft plans on the O-line?
I really would, Stromberg's a really smart guy, but I really wouldn't be surprised if, you see the kid out of Utah not even make the team because, I thought let's see how he is if he moves inside. I never thought for a second that this is a guy that can, be a future starting tackle for you. So, he might not be on the roster, but Stromberg, I really like him a lot. After, they drafted him, watched his tape. Yeah, he did play guard and center. So they didn't just thrust him into that. He did play both positions. I could see right away, though, he still has a lot to work on as far as his, reaction ability, his counters. So there is something there. Right now, I think based on who you have on on the roster, he has just a good chance as anybody on the, to be a backup center. But will he challenge for a starting center position? I think we're in bad shape if we have, if we're kind of seeing a competition between him and a draft pick or, a veteran. I think you got to go into training camp, thinking he's somebody whose depth can bring you depth at guard and center. But I'm not looking at him as somebody that, is your future. I question a lot of these, Rivera picks, and I don't really question, him. But as far as projecting him to be a starter, yeah, I think that would be awesome. I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it as well. And it would kind of be irresponsible for Washington to go into the draft with him pegged as a starter
Right.
and to ignore the center position. When I'm looking at the left guard spot, other than the two guys you mentioned, who's your top interior prospect that will be available for Washington in the second and third round?
Like I said, I mentioned Frazier, so that's back end third round. But yeah, I'm still getting into the interior guys. A guy that's rising, I was looking at as a late day two guy is Connor Beebe from Kansas State. He's a guard,
Mhm.
just absolutely nasty. Bare paws, but still developing as a pass protector. See, that's what's going to go on with a lot of the interior linemen. They excelled in the run game, but they're still developing in pass sets. So those are some guys I really like. Again, I'm going to be diving deep into that position in the next couple of weeks. But so far, those are two guys that I can see in that back end of the third round. But again, I mentioned BB. Another guy had a great Senior Bowl. They're looking at him, potentially moving into the mid second round. So the more we hear, the more the pro days come. I think that guys that even we like in that day three, early day two range, they'll be talking about moving into day one. So right now, it's just a work in progress.
Hell yeah. And to close out the offensive line aspect of today's pod, let's move to the right tackle position. You mentioned Andrew Wiley would probably be best suited in a guard spot, being kicked into the interior because he became a bit of a turnstile out on an island at right tackle, and he was getting Sam Howell killed at certain parts of the season. Say Washington does do that. Who are some options for Washington if we decide to double dip at the tackle position and get young stalwarts on both the left and right side of the offense? Say we already got a guy like Jordan Morgan on the left
Right.
side, Tyler Guyton. Who are we putting on the right side of this offense? Whether that's mid rounds, whether that's second round, or whether that's someone we could steal later in the draft.
Yeah, you mentioned Guyton, J.C. Latham out of Alabama. People talked about him the first. I don't see it. I see some deficiencies, but a lot to work with. I think, that's a guy in the early second round you're talking about. And again, I mentioned Patrick Paul. He's a guy that I believe can even slide over to the right. Would probably be beneficial for him to move over to the right side early on in his career and, potentially move to the left. So those are, two guys, we talked about Fuaga for Oregon. I think he's going to be way off the board. So he's not even consideration. Like I'm right now I'm watching Garrett Greenfield, South Dakota State, played right for 2 years, played left for 2 years. So that's a guy talking about that late fourth, early fifth. A guy Dankwa from Howard, mammoth, 6'8", 362 pounds, as big as he is, and as crazy as it sounds. People even talking about him playing guard just because he had really good bend for a
That's
guy that
crazy.
size.
That's
But
crazy.
otherwise you're talking about late fifth, early sixth, so there's some early guys I'm looking into, but I'm really going to be, going through, the coal to find the diamonds in that mid rounds, because I think that's where Washington is really going to find some of the best. I don't think they're, maybe they'll be lucky if they can find, a real blue chip guy in that top 60, 75 range. But I think ultimately 2 years from now, we're going to be talking about guys in the mid round that they drafted, mid even to late round, that are, cornerstones for their offensive line.
Hell yeah. And they want to develop through the draft and supplement through free agency. Those are beautiful words to hear as a Washington fan. When you hear we talk going back to Dankwa, the Howard guy, does
Yeah.
that size bother you? Because when I hear that size, it makes me think DeJuan Jones, it makes me think
Yeah.
Mekhi Becton of guys that are just too fucking large to function at the NFL level.
Yeah, well, DeJuan Jones he did some good things,
He did.
for a little bit too. And yeah, it is a concern, especially for a guy that's coming out of the HBCU level, because it's really hard to project, when he's going against, those kind of defenses. It's a significant jump to the next level. So for a guy like that, that's what the combine to me. People say that it's the underwear Olympics. Bullshit. There's legit things to really walk away from the combine, and guys like him are the ones that I'm gonna be looking for. The Jaden Daniels and guys like that, they're gonna look great throwing the ball, but ultimately, these are the kind of guys they're going to be seeing in the drills. How quick are they moving? How low are they getting? How quick are they getting off their sets? These are the things that are going to, take a guy from maybe undrafted 6th round to potentially 4th, 3rd round if they really shine that much. But I just love the process. A lot of people are like, oh, I just wish we could get to the draft, but I love the process because
I
you
love
have
it
the pro
too.
days, the all-star games, and then the combine leading up to that. So I think that's a big guy. It's concerned. 365 pounds, by the way. So I definitely don't think he's going to be able to play with that weight. So I think I'd look for him to drop a significant amount before the combine. I didn't look at the full combine list. I know it just dropped. I don't know if he was invited. I hope he was, because they do need to invite a lot more of these HBCU small school guys. But once he gets around, more of these SEC, bigger talent level guys, see how he performs. I think that's when we'll really get a better idea of, a guy like that, how far he can go.
Okay, and before we close the book on the offensive line side of the ball, is there anything else or anybody else you wanted to get a mention before we move over to linebackers?
Like I said, I'm still going. I did out of my 15, I've done 5 offensive linemen, so it's going to be a work in progress. My goal is to get through at least 15 offensive linemen before April's draft. But yeah, I think we pretty much went over a lot of the guys that are on my radar right now.
Okay, and moving on to the linebacker side of the ball, our last head coach and defensive coordinator were both linebackers in the NFL, both defensive minds, and for whatever the fuck reason, Washington has not found a fixture or solution to the linebacker position. Before we talk about the guys available, what is Jamin's ceiling at this point, especially giving better tutelage and better coaching and better development that we're expecting from Joe Witt Jr., Ken Norton Jr., and Dan Quinn? What is Jamin's ceiling in this defense, and what is his ideal position in a Dan Quinn defense?
Honestly, what gets me excited is if you go look back at his last year at Kentucky when they let him loose on the edge, he was really productive. So I'd like to see them, draw up, design more things from him, because they made a point today in the press conference that who's ever balling out in practice, they're going to be a guy that's going to get that, get that rock, get that label to really, just be moved around, do all kinds of great things. But I think that we have to temper our expectations on him, because I think it's been a couple of years, bad coaching or not. I think that he might be one of those prospects that's, just he's hitting that ceiling right now of, what he can do. I question, will there be a legit opportunity to see can he play Mike? Because again, I think you have to be a cerebral kind of player, and the word is he's not really that guy. And dealing with some of the off the field stuff, showing he's not the most smartest guy when it comes to doing stupid shit. So I think that you got to lead by example. So I think they're going to try him at that weak side linebacker spot, but I really truly believe that he's not going to get that 5th year option. Obviously, I don't think.
I don't
And
think so
I
either.
think that, going into free agency, I think you're trying to replace him. You're going to give him a shot in camp, of course, but, you're really looking to build that defensive scheme. And, is there going to be a spot for him? Do they have that much faith in, what he's done? And I think, honestly, he was overdrafted to begin with from Washington. And
Nice.
I think they never had a plan for him. I think if you draft a guy ahead of the players that they bypass, you better have a plan. And there's never been a plan. So what it comes down to me, will Quinn in this defense have a plan for him? And, and will that involve moving him around? Because to me, that's the only way he sticks and has a future in Washington. I think you don't just leave him at that spot, let him play and see how it goes. I think if you've got to move Jamin around, see what you can do, especially on the pass rush. Other than that, I don't know. I'm not huge on, his ceiling right now. So
Yeah, I'm not huge on him either, but we're gonna see. We're gonna see how
yeah,
it goes. He's at a critical point of his career. It's do or die for him as a prospect at this point, going into year 4, where we're probably not going to pick up his 5th-year option. He's at the point now where the game should be slowing down for him mentally. And not only does the game need to slow down, he needs to slow the fuck down when he's driving his car,
right.
because maturity is a factor at some point. And as a guy we drafted for high character and military upbringing and all that, that's not working out so far on the Jamin Davis spectrum. But back to draft prospects, 2024's linebacker class. It seems to be a very top-heavy middle linebacker class. If you had your choice and Washington could get one guy that could be a game changer as the middle linebacker of this class, who's your top dog in this class?
Hmm. That's a hard one. Right now, it's a 3-man race for me with Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Peyton Wilson, and Cedric Gray. People have questioned with me. I got a lot of smoke for saying, because people think that Wilson's the outside guy, not the inside. But I definitely think that guy can be a mic for you for 10, 15 years. So right now, I'm really stuck with those 3 guys. But, gun to head, if I have to choose any of those, man, you take out the past injury situation, Peyton Wilson's the best of the bunch. I just love it. He's a little lanky, concerns some, but
He's
I
huge.
love that length.
He's a
I love his
tall ass
hustle.
linebacker.
You
Yeah.
see what he does, chasing the ball from, when it looks like the play is dead to rights, and, he's the one catching running backs from behind. Those are the kind of things that you want to see from, your Mike leader. But right now he's my favorite, but I haven't watched Gray, just a couple games, but people tell me, he's the one that's going to be out of all of them. But right now, Wilson is my favorite though.
When I look at Peyton Wilson, if you dropped him here on this defense, where is he playing and how exactly are you utilizing his skill sets here in DC? I was watching him chase a guy down from like 60
Yeah.
yards up the field. You cannot teach that type of effort. You cannot teach that type of high motor. He looks like a different type of linebacker. He looks like he's like 6'4". He's a
Yeah.
huge linebacker. How would you use him here in DC?
I'm going to build him up to be that Mike.
Mm-hmm.
I like his speed. I like his football intelligence, his hustle, and he's strong. He's lanky, but now he's strong. He can lay the wood. So I'm bringing him in, and from day one, no matter who I have, like let's say they sign White for Devin White from Tampa Bay. If that's a guy that you want to plug in there at that Mike spot, I think you're still building him up to be that. Even if it's not this year, that's where I want him.
Say we sign like a Frankie Louvu and draft a Peyton Wilson from NC State. Where does Jamin fit into that situation at that point?
See, that's tough. That's what I mean. Like you're going to be building this linebacker corp as if you don't have one, because you pretty much didn't. So even though you drafted him, first round, that was the former regime.
Mm-hmm.
I think good teams don't look at the money dedicated to players, and they don't look at where they're drafted. I think he'll get an opportunity, but I think you're just going to bring a bunch of guys into free agency, and you're going to see, maybe they find a role for him. Maybe it's a situational role. Maybe he can, beat out whoever comes in. But for right now, I just don't see a ton of upside with him being your starting weak side linebacker.
Yeah, I wouldn't be mad if we drafted as if Jamin Davis was
Yeah,
not on the
I think
roster.
you have to.
It's a position that we've long neglected. We've ignored upgrading at it, and we've put a bunch of band-aids over bullet holes with
Yep.
guys like Cody Barton, John Bostic, and company. But talk to me about a name that will ring bells for Washington fans, because Jeremiah Trotter played for the Redskins back in the day, played in the division with the Eagles. Other than the name, what is Jeremiah? It appeared at some points in the college season he was just going to run away with being linebacker
Right.
one, but did he not quite grasp and stand out ahead of the rest of the class?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it tapered off a little bit, but his read run recognition, I think it's the best out of all the guys that we talked about. 7 sacks, 2 interceptions, showed he could mirror tight ends and running back. So that's what you want in your Mike. Nonstop motor, really excelled in pursuit, and that's what we talked about with Peyton Wilson. So like I said, It's really about picking your poison, who you feel the best in your system. There's questions, I think, with a lot of guys. But right now, to me, top to bottom, Trotter is probably the best prospect as far as to come in and, contribute right away as a middle linebacker. Does he have the highest ceiling of the bunch? That's where I'm still at a stalemate right now. But because you mentioned it, I saw there was times where it's excellent play and then he would just taper off. And, sometimes you question, is that effort? But, you just never know.
Yep, and they said, though, you see the words at the top of the screen: physical, explosive. Those are the words they describe. Joe Witt Jr. today spoke of a defense where he said it's going to be violent. It's going to be violent. That's what I want my guys to be when he gets them out there. Me and my boys in our group chat, we have a favorite at the linebacker position, one of the probably the freakiest guy at the position in the entire class. My guy Jalen thinks he could be a Bruce Irvin type where you can get a lot of blitzing and you can bring him off the edge as well as playing him at linebacker. Have you watched much of Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M? Because that guy looks like a freak on tape.
Oh yeah. I haven't talked about him much on social media because I've actually watched some Texas A&M games. I didn't just watch the all 22 on him, so I'm looking forward to getting that. But you talk about what Dallas did with Parsons. I think that's what you can do with him. I'm not saying he's at the level of Parsons yet, but man, he just does so many good things. But then you add in how he's in coverage. He's excellent covering tight ends and running back. So he's offering, a lot of things as a pass rusher and a guy in coverage. So that's a guy I honestly, I don't think he's going to get out of the top 25. I think he'll probably be around that 20 to 25 range. I think people talked about him in that second round range, but I never saw
round one. You think he's going super early?
Yeah, I think he's going to go in the top 25. I think he's going to just continue to rise because if you just look at the position, who's ahead of him on that level as far as outside linebacker. A lot of people I've talked to, though, have said, he's probably best suited for a 3-4 guy on the outside. But I don't agree. I do agree that that's a spot he could excel in. But I think in any package, 4-3 base, nickel, anything, I think you can find a role with him if it's, 3-5 technique, whatever. That's what I love about him. You talk about Parsons, a lot of the same things he can do. But yeah, no, I think he's going top 25. The people that are saying he's the second round, that was a month ago.
Wow, top 25 for Edgerrin Cooper. So let's just say, for whatever reason, Edgerrin Cooper's there when Washington's on the board at 36. Would you mind them taking him there at 36, second round, first pick in the second round for Washington?
Yeah, I would take him. Although, we would think as fans, what about offensive line? And granted, there's going to be some really good offensive linemen, I'm sure, on the board. But like I said, I'm expecting a run on wide receiver and O-lineman in the back end of that first round. So I think you're talking about, if he somehow slips to that point, an OT 6-7 compared to, arguably the top outside linebacker in the class. I think if you have a plan, he gets you excited as a Washington coaches, which I think he would. Yeah, you definitely pull the trigger.
What does the UNC kid excel in? Cedric Gray.
He's another guy that's real fast, good in coverage. But the thing about him is that he's a little bit out of control sometimes. I'm only 2 games into him, but 1 interception, 5 sacks, 3 pass breakups last year. So, the numbers don't jump out at you. None of the numbers do with a lot of these guys, the position this year. But it's just really what he does off the ball so far that I really liked with him. He's got good instincts. You show that he understands angles. So it's not just one thing about speed. And he clocked it 20 miles per hour. It's about his angles and anticipation. So far, that's what's jumped out to me. I think he's a guy that it would not surprise me. A team reaches on him at the end of the first round. Like, I think that there's going to be teams that really need a position so bad, they're just going to reach on him. And I can see a guy like him, even though I have him behind Trotter and Wilson, I could see him going ahead of all of those guys.
Yeah, you said he's uncontrolled sometimes. I don't mind a little chaos. We can get a little chaos on the defense. Someone out there needs to be running around with their hair on fire. We know the top guys at the position, the Edgerrin Coopers, the Cedric Grays, Jeremiah Trotter Jr.'s, and the Peyton Wilson. Are there any sleeper linebacker candidates that nobody's talking about right now?
Some people talk about Tommy Eichenberg, OSU. He's a guy that offers you some flexibility. He's not a guy I love, but I think if you're talking about in that third round, even with that late second round, that's something to think about. But a guy that I did evaluate out of Florida State, this is a true coverage, Mike type, Tatum Bethune, a little undersized. Came out 6'1", 230, so it's not real small. But no, he's a guy that I just really liked what he did in coverage. I love his anticipation skills. If you see on tape that Jaden Daniels takes that hit, looked like he just died on the field versus Florida State. That was Tatum Bethune that made that hit on him. That literally just like picked him up and
Wow.
slammed him. So he's a guy that can really lay the wood, good in coverage. So I haven't heard too much buzz about him, but he was the first linebacker that I wrote about so far. And I think with him, he's again a guy that I think will be available in that third round, just because I don't think he has impressed people that much with his college statistics and everything like that. But man, his film, I absolutely love how he's flying around to the ball.
When I look at the national champions, everybody on that defensive side of the ball flashes something. But two guys I really pay attention to is the nickel, San Still, and their linebacker, Junior Colson. Have you watched much Colson yet?
Not much Colson, but the Nickelback Central, I did. He's a guy that that's what you're talking about, right? Out of Michigan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
really good.
Yeah. No, he's a guy a little undersized. I think he checked in around 5'11". I think it was his final height. I think it was like 185, 190. So he's not the biggest guy, but man, he really mixes it up. 6 interceptions, had the big interception in the
Yeah,
national
he's good,
championship.
man.
He's
He's
all
good.
over the field. So he's another guy that I think will rise a lot during this process. He's definitely, without a doubt, the best slot nickel corner in this draft. So yeah, he's another guy. Don't be surprised, a team in the back end of the first round grabs him, even though I had him going later than that. But like, the more I'm watching, the more I'm seeing. Sometimes it's not about how high these guys you think will rank. It's going to be what do you think teams will need and what teams will do. And a guy like him, yeah, I don't think he's going to last long. I think he's definitely off the board in that that top 50.
Okay, so anything else on the linebacker side of the ball before we move off that? And I'm going to ask you a couple more. We're going to get out of here.
No, I think I'm looking so far. So I'm not into March yet, but by March I'll literally about be able to spout another 20 guys to you. But right now, no, I'm still watching offensive linemen right now.
Okay, because I want to get a little draft series going where we can get a little back and forth where we can do just like we did on this one, preview a
Right.
position on both sides of the ball, and we could talk about a list of guys who would make sense here for Washington. But we all know the biggest question of the offseason is who is Washington taking at 2? As we sit here on February 15th, a couple weeks before the NFL draft combine. Right now, who do you think Washington would select with the second overall pick?
Well, May and Daniels are the 2 quarterbacks that I've evaluated so far. And honestly, after the Kingsbury hire, I think Daniels. I think he just is able to do a lot more for your offense. The fears are warranted about, he takes unnecessary hits, slender build. But come on, the RG3 comparisons, they need to stop. The guy is nothing like RG3. His anticipation ability, people have questioned his ability to read the field. And I've reached out to guys I know that are doing to do heavy scouting in the SEC and talk to the coaches a lot. They say what you don't understand is you think every quarterback has a 3-4 read progression, but in LSU, a lot of times they were asking him to make a first read, second read, and run and take off. So a lot of times to think that, he was just, free balling it and just running when he want, they were designed. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind with him. But anytime, there was situations where he's in the pocket, flushed out, I just love his anticipation. Malik Neighbors and everyone had great receivers there. So a lot of people will question, did they really, bail him out? But if you look at a lot of his anticipation throws, he has the ball out before those guys have even turned their head around or broke. That's what you need. One thing I know, even if you're not going to call this the air raid, it is a timing-based scheme, and you have to have that. You cannot throw your receivers open. Unfortunately, there was a lot of that I saw with May. Is he threw his guys open? Granted, he was able to get into tight windows, but with Daniels, I just show more anticipation. I just think he fits more into what they're probably looking to do. But again, it's just my projection and guess.
So if we did draft Jaden Daniels at 2, you feel comfortable naming him the starter right away and getting right to it?
I think you pretty much have to. I
You
think this
do.
is a situation like the Texans, and that's another reason it's made me even, fall more in love with not the player, but the idea of taking someone like him. Is Louis Riddick is a guy that I trained under, and on Get Up, I think it was yesterday,
He loves
he was
him.
talking about Stroud and him, and not that they're similar players, but just getting that similar feeling. And I am too, because we talked about the Alabama kid last year, and I said I'm just not on as high on him. I think Stroud is really going to be that guy, and I'm really feeling the same kind of vibes with Daniels. And I think it would probably be a good idea to think about bringing a guy like Jacoby Brissett back. His mentoring ability, just his style of play. But again, so what does that leave you with Howell? Because I still like the idea of him as a spot backup. A lot of people are one side or the other. I think that there's that middle ground that you have to look at him. That he still has ability, cheap contract, fifth, former fifth rounder. So I'm not in a hurry to get rid of him. But a camp competition, I'm not with that. If you're taking Jaden Daniels at 2,
starter,
yeah,
yeah.
maybe you don't announce it, but yeah, in house, yeah, he's your guy.
Yeah, it's kind of like a formality because you knew Bryce Young and Stroud and Richardson were all going to start for their respective teams going 1, 2, and 4 last year, but they didn't announce it till around camp. But everybody in the local media and the fan bases knew it. You kind of don't have to make it a thing. Like Ron liked to try to drive up and force the word competition, even when we knew who was starting. Like, just let it be what it is. But I see with Jaden Daniels, his legs can speed up the learning curve while he's developing as a passer. He gives you a weapon where your run game can be absolutely dangerous, and defenses have to account for the fact that this guy could take off for 70 yards anytime if you're caught lacking. But
and this is where you also talk about Lynn. See, a lot of people are just stuck on the idea that you're bringing in someone like him and he's just going to be with the running backs. It's a fact. A lot of these position coaches, they'll talk to they'll talk to the quarterback. So you talk about a guy with Jaden Daniels, the kind of mad scientist shit that would go on in a room with Lynn, Kingsbury, and him. That's what honestly got me. That's what changed my mind. That's what made me watch the Daniels film. I honestly was thinking, I think May is probably the better fit. I'm gonna wait a little bit, but then I was like, no, I'm gonna watch it. And after watching it, I just see so many concepts that I think would translate into what they could do great together.
Hell yeah, I'm down for Jaden Daniels. His torso and his lean frame terrifies me. And the fact that he puts his Superman cape on and gets destroyed sometimes, and when he gets tackled, it looks like some Looney Tunes shit. Like he looks like he's getting thrown out the club every time he gets tackled. But the flash plays, the splash plays, the touch on his seam and fade balls, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and he's progressively got better each year of school. I would totally understand Washington drafting him. I also would understand if they took the piece of clay that is Drake May. Louis Riddick, a guy you said you trained under, said there's a sizable gap between Caleb Williams and the next two, and then there's a big gap also between Jaden Daniels to Drake May. He likes Daniels that much. Are you willing to go on that limit? Are you willing to stay on that hill as well?
I think that there's a legitimate right now distance between Daniels and May. But again, in saying you're talking about molding, I think there'd be no better place to mold him with Kingsbury and the staff that they have. So if they took May, of course, I want to see Daniels because I think that he has, more explosion. But I think May would be, I don't know if you want to call it a safe pick, but he has the NFL body. He has the look. But people have talked about cross between Herbert, Josh Allen. So I think that's high praise. But I think if you can really get him zeroed in, he definitely didn't play with the same kind of talent Daniels did, and he still had a hell of a season. So there's a lot to like right there. But as I wrote about, the similarities to Hal that, people talking about you and not another UNC quarterback. The only similarity that I truly see is the hero ball mentality. And although Daniels looks like it, I feel like he was more under control actually with that. But when it came to May, I think that he turned down a lot more of those check downs and more of those high percentage, mid-range plays. They could have been, more higher percentage. And he just went for that hero ball route. So that's one of the main things that concerns me with him.
Okay. Yeah, Daniels looks in control most of the time. He never really looks like he's doing anything sporadic or like he definitely plays under control most of the time. He's a kid who you definitely can tell has played 5 years at the college level. And the final question to close this thing out, please enlighten me. What the hell is with all this late surging of JJ McCarthy. What am I missing about Michigan's quarterback JJ McCarthy? Because there's no sex appeal to how he play. They almost play as if they don't have a quarterback at times there at Michigan. What am I missing about JJ McCarthy?
It's the same thing on the shows that me and Doug are doing. Every week we have another guy, and it's Bo Nix and JJ McCarthy are going from a late first. Now we're here in top 15. I don't see it, and especially with McCarthy, the reason I don't see it, the Michigan tape I'm watching for other players, not him. He's you're banking on him doing things that he doesn't have on tape. He doesn't have a ton of tape out there where he is a guy that you can trust to be your franchise quarterback. He's had great moments, but I don't see it. And as far as Bo Nix, you can't ignore his Auburn film. You have to look at his whole body of work. And when he went to Oregon, you can see a lot of that is system, and that's what those two guys are. Those two guys are products of really good systems, and it helped them shine. And I think we're hearing about it more because it's the draft. We want to hear about 5-6 quarterbacks going in the first round. So I think, they're definitely going to move those guys up. Penix has took a step back. I think early on people were talking about, he's a guy, but I even liked him myself, but those knee injuries and shoulder injuries scare the hell out of me.
Not on my board at all.
You throw in the fact that he's not a mobile guy. I think that exactly like you said, I think it takes him off both boards. So, what are they going to do? They have to rise up somebody. And saying that, I do think one of those guys, Nix or McCarthy, is going to go a lot earlier than we think, probably in that top 15, 20 range. And, another one's going to go in the back end because right now, I think 5 will go in the first round total. But it's about a supply and demand. It's teams out there like the Raiders, other teams that are too far off to, probably move up. And thinking, how can they solve the quarterback position? So a lot of it is generated by fan bases and medias in those markets, especially Vegas, because I do know a couple people out there, and that media is really pumping up McCarthy a lot, to go after him. So yeah, it's this time of year, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen because we see it with quarterbacks every year.
Yep. Agents do it. They drive up the price. He got the ringing endorsement from Jim Harbaugh once he took the LA job. So he put it out there on a national scale. I'm just not seeing the vision with JJ McCarthy because I look at that Michigan offense. He's like the 6th option for them to rely on that offense. I don't see it. I don't know where he's challenging May and Daniels for QB3 talk is coming from, but I think a lot of things are told as fallacy in the draft process. It's lying season. It's smoke season. We saw a lot of these same narratives with Will Levis last year, and he eventually fell completely out of the first round. He actually showed some good signs as a rookie there in Tennessee. But thank you for coming on with me today. We're definitely going to make this a thing. I'm thinking next time you come on, we can do safeties and tight ends, and we can talk about those 2 positions. Let folks know where they can find you and where they can hear and follow you for your draft analysis.
Yeah, definitely check me out as always, the burgundyandgoldreport.com. I'm on Instagram, on Twitter. You can catch me and Doug McRae's show every Wednesday.
Always.
We have a live show on Twitter, also on YouTube. It's the Big Douglas Show. I also put the episodes on my channel. It's under the Burgundy and Gold Report, but B&G Report Happy Hour. Just a little show I do, nothing too serious. But all my content, all my evaluations, commanders, scouting reports, find them the burgundyandgoldreport.com.
Y'all heard the guy. Until next time, hail to the Washington Commanders. And with this draft series to be continued. Until next time, we're out.